I am here today with Sahaj Sharda, who is an author and is someone who's very passionate about something that is incredibly important. And I've been listening to a lot of other podcasts that he/you have been doing, and I think it's such an important discussion to have. And it's not only something that's an issue in America either. It's something that is widespread across a lot of the Western world. And we're finding over here in the UK with our universities, it's a similar thing. So we'll kind of jump off with, obviously, you're an author of the book College Cartel, and well, I'll let you explain it. So with this book, College Cartel, just as a jumping off point, what's that? And then we'll delve into the minutiae of it.
Yeah, so the main thesis of the book is that in the United States in particular, the elite colleges, the top 20 ranked schools, the top 30 ranked schools, essentially collude in all sorts of ways that hurt the public. And so, a lot of these stories have been covered by the press. So the press will talk about how much lobbying the elite colleges will do, or maybe they'll talk about, some of these loan programs and the debt problem. But a lot of these things also aren't covered by the press. And so what I really get into in the book is if we were to apply like an anti-monopoly, antitrust frame to this problem, what are some of the conclusions we'd come to? And what I say in the book is essentially the elite colleges have formed this sort of implicit cartel that squeezes students by creating a scarcity in the market. So it's a lot like OPEC, or a lot of these, other paradigmatic examples of cartels, which sort of squeeze supply in order to juice price. And that's exactly what the elite colleges are doing. And so this book is really trying to push that message, and then also trying to imagine what a world looks like where we try and break that cartel up, and how that will explode opportunities for middle and working class people in America.
Amazing. So jumping off that, you obviously you find a value in education, and you are an educated individual yourself as well. So I wonder if you could just explain a little bit of how you value education and what some of the issues are that are being caused by this problem.
Yeah, so, I'll take a step back and maybe talk a little bit about my family background here. Three generations ago, or I guess 2 generations ago, my grandfather grew up in India. He used to study by like candlelight. And these are stories that I sort of grew up with because he lived on a farm where there was very little electrification. To the extent that education was accessible, you really had to fight for it. And he went on to get a bachelor's degree. He went to college. He went on and got a master's. He even went on and got a PhD. And so that was sort of like the foundational story in my household of social mobility, which is education is meant to be the silver bullet, this thing that allows for social mobility, the one way that you can uplift yourself. That's always been my view of education, that this is what it's supposed to be, the silver bullet, the thing that really uplifts people. And what's been quite disappointing for me is as I've gotten older, as I've interacted more with the American higher education system, it seems to me we've almost inverted that mission. Instead of being a silver bullet for too many, it's golden shackles. And I think what we need to do is think very deeply about what the real mission is and whether or not our most elite educational institutions are really meeting that mission.
That's a very good way of putting it. And one thing you said in one of the other podcasts that I really like, and I would like you to delve into a little bit more, is that education and degrees are not the same thing. If anything, you've actually described them as an antonym. So I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, so one of the things that I really liked doing when I was researching this book was reading about some of these like famous autodidacts or self-taught people throughout American history and also just global history. So one of our most famous examples is this guy named Abraham Lincoln. He went to the back of a barn, borrowed some books. He was deeply in debt. But when he came out of that barn, he was, one of these like sort of great lawyers, completely self-taught. And he'd sort of practiced himself, into being great. When you really think about it, this is like sort of like a very common theme in America and other very socially mobile places. So you can think about some of our founding fathers, people like Benjamin Franklin, who, sort of taught themselves all these different things and became polymaths. You can think of, in the ancient world, people like Demosthenes who would go in the cave and fill their mouth with rocks so that they could get rid of their stutter. And this was all done, sort of in a very self-directed, self-motivated way, which was completely dissimilar from, the traditional credentialing system that has emerged as this sort of dominant modality of education. In the UK, you have these famous people like Faraday, who wasn't particularly educated at all, and yet he unlocked the secrets of electromagnetism. And so you have all these famous examples, people like Da Vinci. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And, one of the questions I ask in the book is, in this world that we live in now, where we've had this internet revolution, this information revolution, where we have now today things like ChatGPT, where there's more information available on YouTube, on Wikipedia, on the internet, through these chatbots than ever before. Why aren't we seeing more Michael Faradays or more Abraham Lincolns or more Da Vinci's? Why are more and more clever people not choosing to carve their own path and take their own route to education? Why aren't they trying to teach themselves when there's so much that's accessible today? And, the answer I sort of arrive at in the book is because, the college degree isn't about, the elite college degree isn't about education anymore. It's about credentialism. It's about signaling. It's an information good. It signals that you're better or worse than someone else to an employer. And, I think that was a really big insight for me in this book, because when you really understand what the function of the degree is today, then you can sort of be quite realistic and cold about what the problems are and what the solutions need to be. I think one of the reasons that this education system hasn't really been tackled aggressively and fixed for such a long time, where the problems have been festering for so long, is because we take this romantic notion of what the universities are doing, and it's just no longer true. They're not, at the vanguard of education. They're not doing so much in tinkering around what the best, methods of teaching, or best pedagogies are. What they're doing today is essentially, creating these signals, creating these ways to market yourself by excluding you or separating you from others. And I think once we understand that, it becomes much more clear what we need to be doing.
Very good points made there. It's one of those as well, because I personally, over here, obviously college and university, in the US it's college, over here it's university. Our college is like your high school. So just to alleviate any potential confusion, because I've got a cross-pollination of listeners in both places. But I didn't go to university. My fiance did, and lots of her friends did as well. But we found that there are certain jobs it's a necessity, some of the more high paying jobs or more specialist jobs and things. Doctor is the main one that springs to mind immediately, and educators and things. My fiance is a teacher. And so one thing that when I finished college and I had that kind of path, I was like, I could either go to university and get higher qualification, or I could do something else. I ended up doing something else. I did an apprenticeship, worked at a place for a year or so and got a qualification that way. But what I was finding is a lot of the time, an education at a university is perceived more as like a badge. It's kind of just like a tick box. It's almost just on like a job application. You just tick a box or not. And there's not really that much more to it in a lot of ways. And I can't remember the stat exactly, but I remember hearing that the majority in the UK, the majority of jobs that require a degree do not require a specialist degree. They just need a general degree. So it's also this, as you say, it's like a barrier to entry. It's basically just, here's loads of hurdles in the way to just kind of stop you a little bit and put you off in a way. But if you get over those things, and over here we have an issue with debt as well. I know it's not quite the same as in the US, but it's increased, especially a few years ago. My generation was the first generation of going to university where all the fees tripled, which is all good fun, but it put me off quite a lot. So I wonder if you could just explain a little bit more when it comes to, in America as well, with the education system and the weight of the financial burden that you get from going to the US, and in what ways that's damaging as well.
Yeah, I think so let me start with the first point you made about sort of your own path, and thank you for sharing that, because I think this is sort of the common narrative we get in the United States is essentially it's education or bust. And by education specifically, they mean this very narrowly defined set of institutions. And so you have to go and get a degree, or there are no other options. And, one of the things I don't really delve into enough in the book, but I hope to start a conversation around, is these alternative paths that other countries have sort of continued to develop. So in places like the UK and Germany, you have more of these like vocational type training programs, you have apprenticeships, you have all these other possible paths to education. And, I think that's something that the United States is severely weakened, and something, for a very long time, people have been talking about, but there hasn't been this big push to make it happen. So thank you, first of all, for highlighting that. On your second point about barriers to entry, I think this is precisely right. And fundamentally, this is the function of the elite education system, which is to create hurdles and keep some people in and some people out. And, one of the things that's really interesting to me is if you just study like American presidents, there's a lot you can learn about like how the education system has sort of shifted. So earlier we talked about Lincoln. Now I'm going to bring up an anecdote about Lyndon Johnson. So he's one of these like really great presidents because he's completely self-made, right? I mean, he grew up in Texas Hill Country in deep, deep poverty. Went to college to this place called Texas Southwest Teachers College. Sort of like a small school in Texas, and couldn't even pay his tuition. At that point, it was like in the hundreds of dollars, and he just couldn't afford it. And so he had to take some time off. He went and became a teacher for a year. He taught some kids, and then he came back and paid his tuition and went on to graduate, and then went on to get really involved in politics first as an aide, and then moved up the ladder from there. But now compare that to today, where it's almost seen as a disqualification if you've gone to one of these community college programs or one of these small college programs that are not well resourced, not well funded, and you want to enter into public service or politics. And it's exactly to your point about this barriers to entry mentality, which is we've sort of there's been this like sort of sociological thing where the same types of people from the same types of backgrounds have gotten the same types of credentials, and they become then the hiring class. And in order to sort of evaluate themselves favorably, they're not going to go out of their way and demean their own degrees, things that they think give them value. And so in all these ways, you have these sort of like stacked barriers to entry where the past generation is locking in standards that aren't relevant to the job. A lot of the jobs that you're referring to where, you just need a general degree. The fact that it's just a general degree, I think sort of explains the point, which is like, there are no actual skills that are prerequisite for the job. It's just a way to filter people out, who they want and who they don't. And I think this is something that's been quite bad, both in the United States, but also in Western countries generally, which is this sort of proliferation of degrees, this degree inflation, degrees that have nothing to do with the job that you're actually doing, skills that have nothing to do with the job you're actually doing, but that you still have to shell out a ton of money, take out in the United States, at least a ton of debt in order to pay for. And it's a very zero-sum status game. It's not something that's positive sum as education should be. And so to me, this is one of the deepest problems that's facing the United States, and it's entirely a problem of our own making. If you turn the money off, if you turned the amount of free credit into the system off, or reformed how it was allocated, or did more on the supply side where you were controlling prices or regulating things in terms of just the sheer amount of waste that's coming out of the system, there's so many low-hanging opportunities to reform and fix the system that we're just not taking. And in the United States, the debt burden is well over hundreds of billions of dollars, into the trillions of dollars at this point. It is really dangerous, the path we're on. And, I think we're going to have a reckoning. And it's for me, one of the reasons I really wanted to write this book is to focus on, look, this is not just a problem for, those people over there. This is also something that's true at the elite universities, where the basic bargain is completely out of whack. What you're paying for is not what you're actually getting. And, by making that very concrete and clear, I'm hoping that we can start to really jumpstart this debate again about how we solve these problems. But you're absolutely right. I mean, this is essentially the function. It's sort of this barrier mentality that's meant to exclude, not uplift.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's one of those things as well. And I think politics is very similar. I know you touched upon that earlier, and it's these two frameworks that are the controlling factors of how society progresses. And in my opinion, healthcare, education, are, the financial stuff as well, but healthcare, education, and politics, they're the three key things of how a society functions. And in my opinion, obviously I'm in England, so we have the National Healthcare Service, but I'm like, all the money of the government really should go into education and healthcare to make sure all your citizens are, well educated and can handle themselves in life, but also are not sick. And then once you've got those two sorted out, whatever money's left over, that should be sorted out for pointless wars and, the other wasted money that both our respective governments like to spend money on. And I know that's quite a liberal thing, but the issue I have with it as well is with politics, especially, the political systems, both in the US and the UK and in many places in the world, need to be changed, just like the education systems do. But the issue is that the people who are in power of changing those things are the ones who are benefiting the most from the disequilibrium that's caused by their outdated laws. So the people in power who are making all this money and etc. in it, they're not wanting to change anything because they're the ones benefiting. And so it's up to almost everyone below to kind of be like, right, we have to vote in this kind of way, or we have to try and use our money in that kind of way, or don't go for these kind of colleges and things. So obviously you wrote this book to try and combat a degree of this. And I think that in when COVID and lockdown etc. happened, that really turned a lot of people's heads, because I know people in the US and the UK were both being like, wait a minute, I'm in lockdown, I'm at home, I'm not even getting a one-to-one kind of experience, and I'm paying the same amount. Where is this money? Where's this value? So I've just thrown a lot of things at you. So back at you. Just, have you noticed a turn in heads? Because I think you are slightly younger than I am, but I think you were in education sort of, I know you're currently studying law as well. You were in education around the time of the lockdowns and things. So I wondered if, I know I've just said a lot of things at you, so you can respond to any and all of them, but I'd put that to you as someone with first-hand experience.
Yeah, so I'm gonna start with this politics point, which is that we have very dysfunctional politics around a lot of these really core social issues, education, healthcare, and so on and so forth. And I think that's exactly right. And so the question is, okay, well, what is driving this very dysfunctional politics? And unfortunately for me, one of the most disappointing things to see has been how in bed the Democratic Party, the left, traditionally the left in the United States, is with the elite colleges and universities, where it's almost, there's this sort of like state-private fusion in the United States, where at the highest levels of power, the Senate Majority Leader's office, in the House with senior leaders, the college presidents at these schools can get a meeting like this. I mean, they just walk right in. In Washington, they have so much weight that they can throw around. And the question for me has always been, what's gone wrong with the Democratic Party that they're taking these stances that are so against working and middle class people? I mean, this is traditionally, and certainly in the way they frame themselves, this is meant to be the party of working and middle class people. It's meant to be the party of making government work, not the party of government is the problem, which is, sort of the Republican position. And yet, when it comes to these issues of education and healthcare, the Democrats are as bad, sometimes worse, on a lot of these issues because they have these deep donor network or patronage network connections with the universities, the healthcare monopolies, and things like this. And for me, this is really the big cleavage where I think young people can have a massive political impact, which is to start running for office against these incumbents, to run on this sort of anti-monopoly platform, both in the higher education system, in the healthcare system, in all of these places where government is supposed to work, where everyone agrees that government needs to have a role. And the question is essentially, why isn't it executing well? I'm not super familiar with British politics, but my understanding is that, this is sort of the cleavage that exists there too, with things like the NHS, with the universities, where, there's sort of, even the left has sort of abdicated its historical role in making these things work. And, in the United States, maybe we'd blame someone like Clinton, maybe in the UK, you'd blame someone like Blair, but, it's a very similar shift, I think, that's happened in both countries where, the politics has gotten so dysfunctional. And exactly to your point, sort of about, what is the role that young people are going to play? I think this is the role they're going to play. I think these are going to be the campaigns that really reshape the country. And it's going to be around specifically these issues, healthcare and education. And I think you're exactly hitting the nail on the head when you say these are the core functions of government, because they are. And these are the most important things. These are the things that determine everything else, essentially. Is your population healthy? Can they work? Can they contribute to society? And two, how How skilled are they? How educated are they? Can they actually actualize, their dreams and ambitions? And these are the core functions of government that have gone so wrong in so many Western countries. It's, to me, one of the most disappointing things that I've learned in writing this book is how responsible the left and the Democratic Party has been in this decline.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of those. In the UK, we have a slightly different political system, but in broad strokes, it works the same. For 99.9% of the time, you've got the Labour Party, who are very, very similar to the Democrats, and you've got the Conservative Party, who are very, very similar to the Republicans. There's a few smaller parties as well. The Liberal Democrats, they would, in theory, be closer to the Democrats, which they kind of are, but they've not won in many, many decades, and they completely screwed over our generation. So they've lost it for a while too. But yeah, it's one of those things. But one thing that I found that's really okay. So when I was in college and things, so college sort of to university age. So when I was in my sort of mid to late teens, I started becoming a bit more invested in the idea of politics and stuff. I was like, okay, I'm starting to get my own money, especially when I finished college and I started working and things. I was like, okay, I can make my own money. These kind of things are starting to intrigue me. I kind of understand vaguely some of these things these people on TV are talking about. So I started delving in and getting more and more interested. And then over time, it just got beat out of me. I was just so everywhere I'd look, whether it's left or right or middle or whatever, it was always these things. It was always the general rule of thumb for basically all of the public in the West, especially in the US and the UK, is just that all politicians are liars. And that's just okay. And that's just accepted. And I'm just like, what is happening here? That the people who are leading our country, we just all know they're liars and everyone's just complacent about it. And I think that our generation, and people like yourself and people even younger than us, they are really starting, with the ones who've especially grown up with the internet already existing. I remember, I'm not quite 30 yet, so I remember just before, the internet was a thing, dial-up connection a little bit, those kind of things. And I think that the generation that have grown up with internet and with that accessibility to all that information just like that, I'm very hopeful. I'm very positive, I think, in a lot of ways. I'm optimistic about hoping that with real action, people can actually go ahead with this. And you've not only written a book, you've been active in protests as well, which I tip my hat off to you, sir, because it's incredible that you are not only speaking these things, but you're putting them into practice. So do you have, obviously I'm sure you'll have other things to add to what I'm just about to ask, but do you have are you optimistic about the future? Do you think that your or our generation and younger can really push forward and get that, get what we need done? Or do you think it's going to take many, many generations to go and we're going to be old and retired until we see that day? I'm interested by your perception on that because you're so educated in this manner.
Yeah, this is something I spend a lot of time thinking about, which is essentially, a lot of the traditionally really powerful roles have been foreclosed by earlier generations, and they have very adverse agendas to young people generally, and the ambition of the country more broadly. And so, how do you work around these things? And some of the things I've done is I've come on podcasts with people like you. I've published this book. I'm trying to talk about these places in non-traditional forums. But the second thing that I've done is exactly what you said, which is, sort of organize protests, get connected with other students, speak on campuses, including my own, organize people and start to mobilize them. And to me, it's that second aspect where I feel the most optimistic because people get it. It's these like really dysfunctional systems are so in your face that like people are looking for answers. It's just we don't have a political discourse that offers anything really, apart from blaming the other side. And there's, if you study markets, there's an interesting thing where apart from monopoly, you also have a lot of these markets with duopolies, and sort of a paradigmatic example in the United States is like Hershey and Mars, these two candy bar companies. And what you see in duopolies a lot of the time is they settle into this sort of almost parasitic coordination where it's not explicit, it's sort of implicit, but they're basically, sort of colluding in sort of reciprocal manners. And over time, they come up with, sort of some sort of equilibrium that's not good for society, but is good for the two of the companies because, over time they recognize that competition doesn't really serve anyone. And you sort of see this in the rideshare market with like Uber and Lyft, where over time, they've started raising prices together. Whereas, in an earlier generation, they were always trying to undercut each other. And you sort of see this like gentle dance towards this duopoly monopoly structure. And this is exactly what's happening, at least in the United States, where we have essentially two parties. And it is so easy for them to just basically settle into this duopoly dance where one side attacks for this, other side attacks for that. They make a lot of noise. The general consensus on what's actually going to happen is shockingly uniparty. The elites in both sides basically know exactly what the deal is going to be, what it's going to look like. You're sort of seeing it right now with President Biden and this debt ceiling deal. And it's a very similar deal. It's the same deal that's been cut so many times in the past, where the elites on both sides in the institutional roles more or less agree on what the uniparty agenda is. They oftentimes have the exact same set of donors or very similar sets of interests that are funding both sides. And so you end up with this delicate dance where in public, they'll say a lot of things that are quite critical of each other. In private, there's a shocking amount of consensus. And I think, these are the places where young people ought to try and make a break. And so, in terms of figuring out what the uniparty consensus is, I think on education, we see it quite explicitly, quite clearly, which is even the Democratic Party is for the elite schools, is for shielding them from antitrust liability, from tax liability, from any sort of public obligation. And so, and certainly the Republicans haven't done too much either on holding them accountable. Although they make a little bit of noise, but when it comes down to it, they've gone to the same schools too. A lot of them, a lot of their kids go to the exact same schools, and so you can really see clearly what the uniparty agenda is on this. I think for young people, you want to run against something, run against the Ivy League, run against the elite colleges, run against their tax exemptions, their antitrust exemptions, run against the price gouging, the extortion, and all of these other practices that they do. Run against the hospitals, run against the hospital monopolies, the private equity shops that monopolize these sectors, run against the pharma monopolies, that basically buy out all competition. These are very, to me, explicit targets that are shielded by the uniparty. But if you're a challenger, you can sort of really, I think, get a lot of traction. People know intuitively that there's something wrong with this system, and they're looking for answers. It's not going to come from the uniparty. It has to come from without. And I think those are the places where young people are going to be the most successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that kind of aversion to the mainstream. It's newspapers, I think, are quite a big indication of that, where a lot of our parents or the parents' generation, they read the newspaper, and whatever newspaper aligns with their agenda, they just follow everything it says. And it's like a lot of us, we came into it and be like, these two newspapers say completely opposite things about the same event. Doesn't that raise any questions? Don't you think there may be some degree of bias? No? Okay, don't worry about it. So it's as you say, and when you said about the duopoly and things, the first thing I thought of was Coca-Cola and Pepsi,
right.
Although Coca-Cola probably a bit higher up than Pepsi. But then I also thought about smartphones, and one thing I've often said is, smartphones, I've got one, you have to live, life. I've got an Android. I had an Apple, I had an iPhone rather, I've got an Android, but yeah, I can't live off the grid, unfortunately, especially not with the podcast. But like I found with Android and iPhone, whenever there's a new upgrade coming out, and no shade to anyone who gets the new iPhone as soon as it comes out or whatever, people live their life and spend their money how they please. But I'm always like, I feel like it's a con because they're both agreeing. Each camera and each battery seems to always match. It's like, oh, the iPhone, we've got this new camera that's, this 100 megapixel. And then the next week, Samsung go, oh, we've actually got one that's 101 megapixel. And they do it with batteries and screen resolution, when in reality, their technology is probably a decade ahead of what we're given. But because of they're both there being like, we both control the market, why would I give you a battery that I could put out, in 5 years' time, if I can give you slightly better batteries in tiny increments, and we can both do it, and we can both charge $100+ extra each time we bump up, as opposed to just jumping to the top. So I really understand where you're coming from with that, and there's so many examples of that in the world, really, where the
So can I just say something about Android Apple? So I think I wish I'd come up with that, but because I think you're exactly right on that. One of the cases I read recently was, I don't know if you play Fortnite or you play video games, but yeah. Epic Games essentially filed simultaneously 2 lawsuits, one against Apple, one against Android, that was basically the exact same. And their complaint was that both Apple and Android take 30% off the top of any of these transactions that happen on mobile devices. And so if you play Fortnite on either Apple or Android, they'll take 30% cut. And what Epic Games was saying was, well, they're not creating 30% of the value. Why are they charging so much? If you look at sort of other payments processing, even Visa, MasterCard, which is sort of another one of these duopolies, it's much, much lower. It's close to 2%. And here they are taking 30%. And so they filed these lawsuits. And, the judge sort of went look one way and the other judge looked the other. And they said, there is competition because the other person's competing. So Apple's competing with Android, Android's competing with Apple. And so they didn't do anything. And I think you're exactly right in all these aspects, whether it's the 30% surcharge or you're talking about some of the features, the cameras, the batteries and all these things. There is so much implicit collusion in these types of duopoly markets that it is, and it's sort of like, I think, you see it in your day-to-day life. But when someone says it out loud, you finally, it's so easy to grasp because it's something you feel like you've always known. I think Apple Android is a really good example of that.
Yeah, it's just mental. And the more I find I look into it, the more upset I get about everything. Because I'm just like, I've got family members who won't drink Coca-Cola because they looked into it and Coca-Cola are evil. And I'm like, if you look at any company that big, you're going to find something that's evil. Nestle cutting down the forests and killing orangutans with palm oil. And then you've got, Coca-Cola poisoning the water supply of a lot of people in Asia and stuff. And that's just the surface level stuff we know about. Delving all the way into some of these corporations, what they do is scary. So just try and kind of put the blinkers on to a degree. But with people like yourself, you're really pushing that and you're saying to people, you're already aware of these things. All of us are walking around like horses with the blinders on. We can clearly see it, but we're just trying not to because we're trying to live our own life and because of cost of living crisis that's affecting basically everyone. And it's on the educational issues that are happening and the political discourse that's happening. There's so many of these things, which a lot of them are probably distractions, or the bits we're allowed to hear are somewhat distractions, but putting that vaguely conspiratorial but quite realistic view of the world to one side, it's one of those things where when there's people like yourself who are writing these books, who are doing these protests, who are going on podcasts to talk to people about these, you're making it so that people can't look away. And I really appreciate that because these things are so important and it's so easy to just forget or brush it under the carpet and worry because as much as I appreciate what my parents did for me, a lot of their generation was especially with climate change, was the thing of, let's not worry about that now. We don't have to worry about that for decades, so let's just push it under the rug. And that kind of mentality, unfortunately, is something which is infecting a lot of people. So I want to throw that idea with you. I know we're getting near the end of the time, but I want to throw that idea with you and then wrapping in with sort of your that thing is, how did you go about writing this book? Because obviously with a fiction, it's quite easy. You have a story, you've got a character, follow the pen. But when it's non-fiction and it's analytical and you've got all this information, how did you go about doing that, especially while also being in education?
Yeah. So, in terms of writing the book, it was really interesting because I think a sequence of things happened in my life, which in hindsight, sort of made it almost inevitable that I would write this book, but I didn't know it at the time. And so when I was in high school, there was this massive admissions scandal that happened at my high school where there was a girl who's a bit older than me who had said that she'd gone to both Harvard and Stanford, and she was of South Korean heritage. And for whatever reason, this really got picked up in the South Korean press as a human interest story. It's and so she got dubbed as, quote, the genius girl in the South Korean press. And for weeks at a time, there was a bunch of South Korean press at our high school interviewing a bunch of us, asking if we knew this genius girl. And then this hothouse media environment, I think either the girl or her family made these claims that Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, called her and told her to choose Harvard instead of Stanford. I think honestly that was probably the inflection point when people really got skeptical about this girl's story because it wasn't, to begin with, it was quite unlikely some of the things that she was saying. That Harvard and Stanford come up with this unique system just for her where she could go to both schools for 2 years each. But I think, some people are like, maybe, who knows? But when this Mark Zuckerberg story came out, a lot of people at our high school started saying, well, this definitely isn't true. This is clearly made up. And so, this girl or her family then hacked or impersonated a Harvard math professor and sent an email out to the whole high school saying, you guys need to stop spreading rumors, things like this. We know better than you. We are Harvard. And that was the moment where everyone's like, oh, this is definitely fake. and there's going to be something that's pretty big that's going to go down. And I remember this had a massive impact psychologically at my high school where, already there was a lot of pressure about who's going where, getting into the most prestigious schools, and, the traditional rat race mentality of American high schools of getting into these elite colleges. But when this happened, we realized that, wow, this is like deeply toxic psychologically. This is something that's really affecting people so much so they'd rather lie than admit that they didn't get in somewhere. And for me, that was like a really vivid example of how toxic the psychology of some of the scarcity of seats had become. And then when I went to Georgetown a couple of years later, there was a girl in my grade whose parents got caught in the varsity blues scandal. And, for those who don't know, this is when a bunch of wealthy people, including Olivia Jade's parents, were bribing via an admissions consultant named William Rick Singer. They were bribing a bunch of athletic coaches at elite colleges like Georgetown and USC to essentially, have their kids pretend to be athletes and get in through this admissions back door. And I remember when that happened, there was a really weird reaction on Georgetown's campus, which is no one was shocked that someone would try to use money to get into the school. Instead, the real shame that was felt on campus was that this girl's parents had been too cheap to just pay the outright donation the legal way that so many others had paid. And I always thought this is such a weird thing that's going on. This is what people have sort of internalized on this campus when, if you look at the outside reporting, it's all about how the game is rigged for the rich. And I think it just sort of confirmed that for me, that this really is true, what the outside narrative is sort of espousing. And then finally, when I was thinking about applying to law school and studying law, there was a tuition strike that was happening at Columbia where essentially, 7 students, really dynamic, energetic students, had organized a tuition strike of almost 1,100 people who all said, we won't pay tuition unless you raise financial aid by 10%. Now, if you understand Columbia's budget situation, their massive endowment, how they sort of throw money around for very silly things, you would understand that 10% increase is essentially nothing. I mean, it was so within the realm of possibility. And yet it never happened. Columbia did not even budge an inch, even though, a sixth to a third of their class was part of this tuition strike. And the question I started to ask is, well, why? Why isn't the school feeling any pressure from so many students who are all collectively mobilizing and acting against these sort of extortionate tuition requests? And so that's when I started to do more research and started to speak to some of the people involved with this protest and started to understand, well, what's going on these campuses, demographically, what's gone on, that at Georgetown, everyone's sort of, a spoiled brat, and what's gone on at the schools that you have so much scarcity of seats that people in high school, not just this girl of mine, but all across the country are lying about going or going to campus and impersonating to be someone else and doing all these crazy things that periodically show up in the news. And as I got deeper and deeper into this, I realized this isn't a bunch of individual stories. This is actually a market structure story. This is a story about scarcity, about a cartel that squeezes students and colludes amongst itself. And then I got deeper and deeper into what those mechanisms of coordination and collusion are, whether it's trustees who are interlocking trustees who serve on multiple boards of similar competing schools, or whether it's using the U.S. News and World Report, the de facto regulator of and ranking system in the United States, to create a criteria that forces everyone or incentivizes everyone to squeeze as much rejectivity out of the admissions process as possible and to reject as many people as possible while spending as much as possible and increasing a massive amount of wasteful expenditure. And so as I tracked all these different collusive channels, I realized that what we have here is this sort of dragon's den of a bunch of colleges that on paper are charities, but in actuality are engaged in the worst forms of monopolization and cartel tactics in order to juice their prestige, squeeze students, and just maximize revenue so that they can spend more money. And, that's what really, drove this sort of more activist streak within me. Because when I figured that out, I realized, this is a story that essentially no one has covered for a very long time, to my great dismay. And so I rushed this book out onto Amazon. It's available on Kindle now, and I've been going on podcasts like this and speaking to students all over the country, trying to get them mobilized around these issues. So thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, Mike.
No worries at all. I know you have to go, so I'll put all the links and stuff into the description and things. And I just want to say thank you for being such an activist, really, for putting so much of your education to good use, to trying to help other people and just trying to be a force for change. It's something I think a lot of people can learn from, not just in the educational sector, but across the world. So thank you so much just for being you, being inspiring. And I look forward to seeing where this goes. And I have the best of luck and the most positivity about your book and the future of the education system. So just thank you so much for your time.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you. I hope we stay in touch.
Yeah, definitely. No worries at all.